Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked into the House Oversight Committee, expecting to dismantle Mike Johnson on national television, but she blindly stepped into a 3-minute political takedown that would permanently redefine her career, all because she underestimated a 2-year-old Bible with a mysterious burn mark. Here is a question nobody had ever asked Speaker Mike Johnson before that morning in House Oversight Committee Room 2154. Where did the burn mark on his Bible come from? After 42 years of carrying it, through 3 swearings-in, hundreds of committee hearings, and 7 years in Congress, no Democrat had ever asked him about it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez asked. She thought a Christian nationalist speaker carrying a prop Bible into a campaign finance hearing was the easiest target in Washington. She was about to find out what the burn mark actually was, and that some traps catch the person who set them. The answer to the question she had just asked on live television was about to become the most devastating, unscripted moment of her entire political career, exposing a reality she was completely unprepared for. The confrontation begins. The hearing room in the Rayburn House Office building was full an hour before the gavel. Reporters from every major network, camera crews from C-SPAN, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and 200 spectators in the gallery. Half of them progressive activists wearing pink shirts that said, "Tax the Rich" on the front, and AOC 2028 on the back. Capitol Police stood at every door. The hearing had been scheduled by Chairman James Comer of Kentucky 3 weeks earlier. The noticed subject was congressional ethics and campaign finance reform. The official witness was Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, called to testify about a Federal Election Commission complaint that had been pending against her campaign organization for 7 years. The complaint concerned approximately $885,000 in donor funds that had moved through a private limited liability company called Brand New Congress LLC, set up by her former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, with no public itemization of where the money had ultimately gone. That was the official subject. That was not what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had come to talk about. What had been less expected, what had not appeared on the original committee notice and had been added only 48 hours before the hearing, was the announcement that Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, would be attending the hearing as an ex officio member, exercising his prerogative under House Rule 10, Clause 4, which permitted the Speaker to participate in any committee hearing he chose to attend. It was a rare move. It was not unprecedented. The last Speaker who had used it had been Nancy Pelosi in 2019, during the early Trump impeachment hearings. Mike Johnson had used it 3 times in his 2 years as Speaker, and today was the 3rd. He sat at the table to the right of Chairman Comer. He was wearing a dark gray suit that he had owned since 2007. It was an unassuming choice for a man in his position, yet heavily intentional. Johnson had acquired other suits since becoming Speaker, but he consistently wore this specific one to major hearings because it was the exact suit he had worn on the day he was sworn in as a member of Congress back in 2017. For him, the garment was not about fashion. It was a physical anchor to his beginnings, representing a deep belief in institutional continuity and personal consistency. In the inside breast pocket of the suit, against his left chest, was a small leather-bound Bible, pocket-sized, 42 years old. The leather was cracked. There was a burn mark on the lower right corner of the front cover, about the size of a quarter, which had been there since May 11, 1984. He had carried the Bible into every committee hearing of his political career, and today was no different. The opening salvo. Comer banged the gavel. This hearing of the House Oversight Committee will come to order. Today we examine congressional ethics and campaign finance reform. We are joined this morning by Speaker Mike Johnson, who has requested to participate as an ex officio member, consistent with House Rule 10, Clause 4. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you are recognized as our invited witness for an opening statement. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood up. She did not need to stand up. Witnesses were not required to stand for opening statements, and almost none of them did. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood for opening statements because she had learned over 7 years in Congress that the cameras loved her better when she was on her feet. Her hands began moving the moment she stood up. The practiced choreography of a woman who had spent her entire political career using her body as a microphone amplifier. Thank you, Chairman Comer. And before I answer any questions about so-called campaign finance, which everyone in this room knows is just a cover for another Republican witch hunt against the only member of Congress who has actually challenged the corrupt political system that produced you, I want to say something to the American people about what is really happening in this hearing room today. Her voice carried the cameras, zoomed in. Sitting across from me is Speaker Mike Johnson, the man who is second in line to the presidency of the United States of America. And I want to tell the American people clearly, directly, without any of the political euphemisms that Washington uses to hide the truth, who this man actually is. She turned to face Johnson and pointed. Mike Johnson is a Christian nationalist. He has said publicly on the record, in interviews and in his own published columns, that the separation of church and state is a lie. He has spent his entire legal career trying to impose his evangelical religious beliefs on the rest of us. He has defended laws that strip LGBTQ Americans of their dignity. He has celebrated the overturning of Roe v. Wade. He believes, and this is a direct quote from his own publications, that America is a, quote, Christian nation that must be governed according to, quote, biblical principles. Her voice was reaching the rally register. Now, 2 of the progressive activists in the gallery had begun to clap softly. A staffer in the second row had her phone out, recording the moment vertically for Instagram. The Republican Party in 2026 is the American Taliban. It is the party of Christian nationalism, of forced birth, of book bans, of the death of American democracy, and the man sitting across from me, the so-called Speaker of the House, is its chief theologian. She pointed at him again. The cameras caught the gesture from 3 angles. Mr. Johnson, you are a threat to every woman in this country. You are a threat to every LGBTQ American. You are a threat to every Muslim, every Jew, every atheist, every person who believes that the United States Constitution guarantees freedom from religion, as well as freedom of religion. You spent 20 years as a lawyer trying to destroy the wall between church and state that the founders built. And now you sit in the Speaker's chair and pretend to represent all of us. You don't represent me. You don't represent the people of my district in Queens. You don't represent the millions of Americans who go to no church, who read no Bible, who live their lives according to their own conscience instead of yours. And Mr. Chairman, I want the record to show that I did not come to this hearing today to answer questions about my campaign finances. I came here to tell the truth about who runs the Republican Party in 2026. And the truth is that it is run by religious extremists who would turn this country into Iran if they had the votes. Jamie Raskin, sitting 2 seats to her right, nodded slowly. The professorial nod of a constitutional law professor who had heard a former student deliver a good closing argument. Jasmine Crockett, on her left, stood up and applauded. 2 of the progressive staffers in the back of the room briefly chanted, "No theocracy, no theocracy," before the Capitol Police quietly approached them and reminded them that chanting was not permitted during committee hearings. Comer let the noise settle. He had presided over enough hearings to know that you do not interrupt a witness's opening statement. even when the witness was using it to deliver a campaign speech, because the man sitting on his right did not need his help to handle what came next. The story of the burn. Mark Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. The purpose of this hearing is campaign finance reform. You may address the Speaker's religious beliefs if you wish, but the committee will expect you to return to the noticed subject. Speaker Johnson, do you wish to respond before we proceed to questions? Mike Johnson, who had been reading something small that he held in both hands, looked up for the first time since AOC had begun speaking. He had not moved during the opening statement. He had not adjusted his tie. He had not taken notes. He had been reading. The cameras had registered this, and several reporters had made small notes in their pads about how unusual it was for a sitting speaker to read during a witness's opening statement and what unusual book he might be reading. He set the small object down on the table in front of him. The cameras picked it up immediately, a worn, leather-bound Bible, small, pocket-sized, cracked along the spine, and on the lower right corner of the front cover, there was a visible marker distinct from the rest of the leather, irregular in shape, the kind of mark that comes from heat rather than from age. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would like to respond briefly. His voice was not what the room had expected. It was not folksy the way Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana was folksy. It was not theatrical. It was not loud. It was the quiet, measured voice of a man who had spent 20 years explaining constitutional law to clients in small conference rooms in Shreveport, Louisiana, and who had learned that the quietest voice in the room was usually the most carefully listened to. Congresswoman, I want to begin by saying that I heard you. I heard every word. I am not going to pretend that what you said did not hurt, because it did. You called me a religious extremist. You called the party I serve the American Taliban. You said I am a threat to women, to LGBTQ Americans, to Muslims, to Jews, to atheists, to millions of Americans I have never met and never harmed. Those are serious accusations, Congresswoman. They deserve a serious response, and I am going to give you one. He placed his right hand gently on the small Bible, not theatrically, but the way a man places his hand on something that matters to him. It was AOC who spoke next. She had not been recognized by the chairman, but she did not wait. She leaned forward across the witness table, her eyes locked on the Bible, and her voice had the sharp edge of a woman who believed she had just spotted an opening. Mr. Speaker, what is that? This, Congresswoman, is a Bible. It is the Bible that my father gave to me on May 15th, 1984. I was 12 years old. The reason I am holding it in this hearing, and I want to be honest with you about this, because I do not want anyone watching at home to think I brought it as a prop, is because I carry it in my breast pocket every day. And I have carried it every day since I was 12. And today is no different from any other day. AOC pressed. She had spent 7 years in Congress learning when to press, and her instinct told her that there was something here she could use. And the burn mark on the cover, Mr. Speaker? That looks deliberate. Is the burn mark part of the prop? It was the question Mike Johnson had been waiting for. He had been waiting for it since he had walked into the hearing room that morning, since he had read AOC's prepared opening statement, which a friendly source on her staff had leaked to him 3 days earlier, since he had sat through the entire first part of the hearing and let her say what she had come to say. He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. The cameras caught it. The room caught it. Jamie Raskin, who had been leaning back in his chair with the slight smile of a man enjoying a colleague's offensive, stopped smiling. Jasmine Crockett glanced at Raskin. Raskin did not glance back. When Mike Johnson opened his eyes, his voice was even quieter than it had been a moment ago. Congresswoman, the burn mark on this Bible is from May 11th, 1984, 4 days before my father gave the Bible to me. I am going to tell you what happened on May 11th, 1984, and then I am going to answer your other accusations. But I think the burn mark deserves an explanation first, since you asked for one. On the morning of May 11th, 1984, my father, Pat Johnson, was a firefighter with the Shreveport Fire Department, and on that morning he walked into a building that he was not going to walk out of the same man. Mike Johnson's voice did not change as he began to speak. He did not slow down for emphasis. He did not look up for reactions. He spoke the way a doctor speaks when he is delivering a diagnosis to a family that has come to the hospital expecting to hear something else, calm, factual, in the voice of a man who has accepted that his job is to tell the truth in plain sentences. On the morning of May 11th, 1984, my father responded to a structure fire at a chemical storage facility on the south side of Shreveport, Louisiana. It was supposed to be a routine call, a fire in a storage building. 3 fire trucks responded. My father was on Engine Company 4. He was 42 years old. He had been a firefighter for 19 years. What the responding crew did not know, what nobody in Shreveport knew on that morning, because the building owner had not properly registered the chemicals stored inside the building with the city of Shreveport's fire marshal, was that the storage facility contained approximately 400 gallons of an industrial solvent that becomes explosive at temperatures above 300 degrees Fahrenheit. The owner had not registered the chemicals because he wanted to avoid the additional inspection fees. He paid a $4,000 fine for that decision 8 months later. My father paid a different price. At 9:43 inches the morning, the building flashed over. For the people watching at home who do not know what flashover means, flashover is the moment in a structure fire when the air itself becomes fuel. Everything in the room ignites simultaneously. The temperature in a flashover can reach 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 2 seconds. There is no warning. There is no escape. There is only the moment before flashover and the moment after, and the difference between them is the difference between living and dying. My father was inside the building when it flashed over. So was Dan Shelton, who was my father's best friend in the Shreveport Fire Department. Dan and my father had served together on Engine Company 4 for 11 years. Dan Shelton was 38 years old. He had 3 children. The youngest, a girl named Charlotte, was 4 months old. Dan Shelton did not survive the flashover, Congresswoman. My father did barely. He was pulled out of the building by 2 other firefighters who, when they reached him, thought they were pulling out a body. He had third-degree burns over 41% of his body. His turnout coat had melted into his skin in 3 places: his upper back, his right shoulder, and the back of his neck. His helmet had partially fused to his scalp on the left side. The medics on the scene worked on him for 19 minutes before they got a pulse. He was admitted to the burn unit at Louisiana State University Medical Center in Shreveport at 10:31 in the morning. The chief surgeon, a man named Dr. James Whitaker, whose name I will never forget as long as I live, told my mother that my father would not survive the night. Dr. Whitaker told her to gather the family and prepare to say goodbye. He paused. The hearing room was so quiet that the sound of a reporter in the back row turning a page in his notebook was audible across the room. I want everyone watching at home to understand something, Congresswoman. I am not telling you this story for sympathy. I do not want sympathy from anyone in this hearing room or anyone watching this hearing on C-SPAN. I am telling you this story because you asked about a burn mark on a Bible, and the burn mark has a story, and the story matters. I was 12 years old that morning. I was a 7th-grade student at Captain Shreve Junior High School in Shreveport. The school principal pulled me out of math class at 10:45 inches the morning and walked me down to his office, where my mother was waiting for me. She did not say anything when I walked in. She did not have to. I knew before she opened her mouth what had happened. I knew because she was a firefighter's wife. And firefighters' wives know what it looks like when the school principal pulls a firefighter's son out of math class on a Wednesday morning at 10:45. My father did not die that night, Congresswoman. The doctors were wrong. He survived. I have never been able to fully explain why he survived when other men with less severe burns have died, except to say that my mother prayed harder during those 116 days in the burn unit than any human being I have ever met before or since. He was in the burn unit for 116 days. He went through 11 separate skin graft surgeries. He was in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks. When he finally woke up, he could not move his arms because the burns and the grafts had caused too much damage to the muscles in his upper back and shoulders. He could not feed himself for 2 months. He could not stand for 4 months. He could not walk without assistance for 6 months. He never fought another fire. The Shreveport Fire Department put him on permanent disability in November of 1984. He was 42 years old, and his career was over. On May 15, 1984, 4 days after the fire, I was finally allowed to visit him in the burn unit. I was 12. I had never seen burn injuries before. I was scared, Congresswoman, and I do not mind admitting on the record, on live C-SPAN, that I was scared. I did not know what I was going to see when I walked into that hospital room. What I saw was my father in a hospital bed, wrapped in white bandages from his neck to his waist, with tubes going into both of his arms and a respirator on his face that he hated and that he kept trying to push away with the only finger he could move, which was the index finger on his left hand. The right side of his face was uncovered. The left side was bandaged. His one uncovered eye was looking at me when I walked in, and the eye was alive, and the eye was the only part of him that I was sure was still my father. On the bedside table next to his hospital bed, there was this Bible, the same one I am holding in my hand right now. Pocket Bible, leather cover, King James Version, large print, because my father's eyes were not what they had been. The Bible had been in the breast pocket of his turnout coat when he went into the building on May 11th. The pocket of his turnout coat had been on the left side of his chest, against his heart, where firefighters always carry the things that matter most to them. The pocket was protected, barely, by the leather thickness of the turnout coat itself, and by the angle of his body when he hit the floor after the flashover. The Bible survived. The leather burned in the lower right corner, the corner that was closest to the heat source when he went down. But the pages did not burn. Not one of them. The pages are still there. Every page. I can show them to you, Congresswoman, if you would like. He did not show them to her. He did not need to. The hearing room had stopped breathing somewhere around the second time he had said the word flashover. My mother was at his bedside when I walked in. She had been there for 96 hours. She had not slept for more than 30 minutes at a stretch in 4 days. She picked up the Bible from the bedside table, and she handed it to me because my father could not lift his arms yet. And my father looked at me with the only eye that was still uncovered, and he tried to say something. And at first, I could not understand him because of the respirator. So my mother leaned down close to his face and listened to him. And then she straightened up and translated for me. She said, "Mikey, your daddy says he wants you to have this. He says a man's got to have something to hold on to. I have carried this Bible every day since, Congresswoman. 42 years next month. I carried it through the rest of 7th grade. I carried it through Captain Shreve High School. I carried it through Louisiana State University, where I became the first member of my family to attend college. I carried it through the LSU Paul M. Hebert Law Center, where I graduated in 1998. I carried it through 20 years of constitutional law practice in Louisiana. I carried it to my swearing-in as a member of the Louisiana State Legislature in 2015. I carried it to my swearing-in as a member of the United States Congress in 2017. I carried it to my swearing-in as Speaker of the House on October 25, 2023, and I carried it into this hearing room this morning. Today is no different from any of those days. Congresswoman, the Bible is in my pocket today because the Bible is in my pocket every day. I did not bring it as a prop. I did not bring it to make a religious point. I did not bring it because I knew you were going to call me a religious extremist on live C-SPAN. I brought it because my father told me that a man has got to have something to hold on to. That, Congresswoman, is what the burn mark is. That is the answer to the question you asked. Now I am going to answer the other accusations. For anyone observing the absolute weight of that profound silence, the atmosphere in the room had shifted irrevocably. The deeply personal story of the burn mark had just paralyzed the committee. Yet the true political reckoning was only just beginning. The reality check. The hearing room was silent. Jasmine Crockett had put down her phone. Jamie Raskin was looking at the table in front of him, and his face, the careful, professorial face of a Harvard Law graduate who had been waiting for an opportunity to spring a procedural objection, was no longer composed. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had not moved her hands since Johnson had said the words, May 11th, 1984. Her hands were resting on the witness table in front of her, palms down, fingers spread, as though she was holding herself steady against something that was moving in a direction she had not anticipated. Mike Johnson's voice did not change as he turned to the second part of his response. He did not raise it. He did not vary the pace. Congresswoman, you compared the Republican Party of the United States of America to the Taliban. I want to address that comparison directly, because I think it is the most important thing you said in your opening statement, and I think the comparison deserves a careful response. I served for 6 years on the House Armed Services Committee before I became Speaker. I have been briefed by military intelligence officers who spent multiple deployments in Afghanistan over the last 24 years. I have read the State Department's annual human rights reports on Afghanistan from 2021 through 2025. I have met Gold Star families whose sons did not come home from Helmand Province and Kandahar. I have visited the wounded at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, which is about a 5-minute drive from this Capitol building. I want to tell you, Congresswoman, with no political anger, just as one American talking to another in a hearing room, what the Taliban actually does, because I think you used the comparison without fully understanding what the comparison implies. The Taliban severely punishes women in public arenas for alleged moral offenses. They have done this hundreds of times since they returned to power in August 2021. The most documented case from the modern era was a woman named Zarina, punished by the Taliban in the Ghazi Stadium in Kabul in November of 1999. The video of her execution is on the internet. Anyone watching this hearing at home can find it in approximately 30 seconds with a search engine. I am not going to describe what happens in the video. I am going to ask the people watching at home to look at it for themselves and form their own conclusions. The Taliban bans girls from attending school after the 6th grade. As of the most recent United Nations Assistance Mission report, there are an estimated 1.5 million Afghan girls who have been barred from secondary education since the Taliban returned to power in August 2021. Their crime is being female. There is no other accusation against them. The Taliban carries out fatal public punishments against LGBTQ individuals from construction cranes. This is documented in the Human Rights Watch annual report on Afghanistan from 2022, and it is confirmed by independent reporting from journalists who risked their lives to cover the country. The Taliban physically assaults journalists who write critical stories about the regime. The Taliban bans music, in all forms, by all artists, in all venues. The Taliban destroyed the Buddhas of Bamiyan in 2001, 6th-century world cultural heritage sites that had stood in the cliffs of central Afghanistan for 1,500 years, because they considered the Buddhas idolatrous. Those are facts about the Taliban, Congresswoman. They are not my opinions. They are documented by the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, by the United States State Department's annual human rights reports, by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, and by independent journalists from Reuters, the Associated Press, the BBC, and Al Jazeera, who have risked their lives to cover the region for the last 4 years. Now, the Republican Party of the United States of America, the party that I lead in my capacity as the 56th Speaker of the House. In the last 4 years, the Republican Party in Congress has voted on the following legislation. We have voted to expand small business loans for women entrepreneurs through the SBA Restart Act. We have voted on increases to education funding through the Every Student Succeeds Act amendments. We have voted on bipartisan criminal justice reform through the First Step Act expansion. We have voted on veterans' health care expansion through the PACT Act, which I supported on the House floor and which President Biden signed into law in August of 2022. We have voted on infrastructure, on border security, on tax policy, on prescription drug pricing reform, on agricultural support for farmers in the Mississippi Delta, and on energy policy. You may disagree with Republican positions on every one of those issues. Congresswoman, you do disagree, and I have read your floor statements, and I respect that you disagree as a matter of legitimate political conviction. But when you stand in this hearing room in the Rayburn House Office Building, under the Constitution of the United States, protected by the First Amendment, on live C-SPAN in 2026, and compare the elected representatives of one of America's 2 major political parties to an extremist organization that executes women in soccer stadiums for adultery, you are not making a political argument. You are making an insult. And the insult is not just to me. The insult is to every woman in Afghanistan who actually lives under the actual Taliban, because you have cheapened her suffering by comparing it to a policy disagreement you have with American citizens who happen to disagree with you about abortion. The women of Afghanistan deserve better than that, Congresswoman, and so I would gently suggest, do the women of Queens. It was Byron Donalds who spoke next. He had been silent since the hearing began. He had been waiting. Donalds was 47 years old, the Republican congressman from Florida's 19th District, the first black Republican elected to the House from Florida in modern history, and the man whose presence at this hearing, although AOC had not noticed, had been arranged by Comer's staff 3 weeks earlier, specifically because of what Donalds was about to say. Mr. Chairman, if the Speaker will yield for 30 seconds, I want to add something to the record. Proceed, Congressman Donalds, Comer said. I am Byron Donalds. I am the Republican congressman from Florida's 19th District. I am black. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1978. I went to public school in Crown Heights. I worked my way through Florida State University, where I played football for 2 years before an injury ended my football career, and I became a finance major. I spent 16 years in the financial services industry before I ran for Congress in 2020. In a lot of ways, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, I grew up much closer to the actual working-class Brooklyn experience that you claim to represent, though I should note for the record, you actually grew up in Yorktown Heights, Westchester County, after your family moved there when you were 5 years old. Yorktown Heights has a median household income of approximately $137,000 per year. Crown Heights, where I grew up, has a median household income of approximately $53,000 per year. These are public census numbers. Anyone watching at home can verify them in 2 minutes. He turned slightly toward AOC. Congresswoman, I want you to know, as one New Yorker to another, as one person of color to another, as one American to another, that you do not speak for me when you call the Republican Party the American Taliban. When you call my party the American Taliban, you are calling me the American Taliban. I am in this party. I am sitting in this hearing room right now as a duly elected Republican congressman from Florida, and I do not recognize the description that you have just offered. I think what Speaker Johnson just said deserves a response from you, not from me, from you. Because the American people watching this hearing on C-SPAN deserve to know whether the Congresswoman from New York's 14th District is willing to withdraw the Taliban comparison in light of the actual, factual record on what the Taliban actually does, or whether she is going to stand by the comparison on the record on live television in 2026. AOC's hands came up off the table. The defensive choreography returned. Congressman Donalds, I am not going to be lectured about race by a Republican. Congresswoman, I am not lecturing you about race. I am telling you that I am in this party and that the party is not the Taliban. That is not a lecture. That is a fact about my own existence as a black Republican in 2026. And I am asking you to respond to the fact, not to the race of the person who is presenting the fact, because the fact does not change based on who is presenting it. The Republican Party either is the Taliban or it is not. And I am sitting here, Congresswoman, telling you that it is not. So either I am wrong about my own party or you are wrong about it. Both of us cannot be correct. The hearing room held its breath. AOC opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at the notes in front of her, and did not speak. She had no answer prepared for a black Republican from Brooklyn telling her that her racism comparison did not work. Her staff had not anticipated Byron Donalds being in the room. The race card had been the strongest card in her deck, and Byron Donalds had just folded it in front of 200 witnesses. In a matter of seconds, the defensive strategy had been completely dismantled on live television, leaving a resounding silence in its wake before the final blow could even be delivered. And Speaker Mike Johnson had not yet even addressed the core financial discrepancies of the brand new Congress LLC, nor the defining story of his mother's yellow legal pad and the electrician who waited 3 years for a simple payment. The ethics of character Speaker Johnson. Comer said, I want to return us to the noticed purpose of this hearing: campaign finance and ethics reform. The committee has documented several scandals during the Congresswoman's career that bear directly on the question of ethics enforcement. You have requested to lead this questioning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman, I want to walk through the public record on the September 2021 Met Gala. I want to do it slowly, precisely, because the facts deserve precision, and the precision will matter. On September 13, 2021, you attended the Metropolitan Museum of Art Costume Institute Gala in New York City. The Met Gala is one of the most exclusive social events in the United States. Tickets to the Met Gala that year started at $35,000 per seat. You attended as a guest of Vogue magazine on an invitation extended by the editor of Vogue, Anna Wintour. You wore a dress that was designed for the occasion by Aurora James of the fashion house Brother Vellies. The dress was white. On the back of the dress, in red letters, approximately 6 inches tall, were the words, "Tax the rich." The fair market rental value of the dress and the accessories that you wore with it was approximately $3,700. This included the dress itself, a pair of designer shoes, a handbag, a custom hairpiece, and jewelry. These valuations are not my opinions. They are the valuations established by the House Ethics Committee in its bipartisan, unanimous report dated July 25, 2025. The report is 31 pages long, Anyone watching at home can find it on the House Ethics Committee website in approximately 90 seconds. The House Ethics Committee found, and I am quoting from page 7 of the report, that, quote, Representative Ocasio-Cortez's conduct was inconsistent with House rules, laws, and other standards of conduct, end quote. The committee found that you had received impermissible gifts. The committee found that you had failed to pay fair market value for the items you wore. The committee found that several of the vendors who provided services to you for the Met Gala, your hairstylist, your makeup artist, the seamstresses at Brother Velli's, the floral designer for the custom hairpiece waited for months to be paid, and that one of them, your hairstylist, threatened to file a complaint with the New York State Department of Labor before she finally received her payment in February of 2022. The committee ordered you to pay an additional $2,733. You complied with that order. The committee considers the matter closed. He set down the small Bible that he had been holding throughout this section and placed it carefully on the table in front of him. Congresswoman, I want to tell you something personal now, because the Met Gala scandal bothers me in a way that some of the other scandals in your career do not, and I want to explain why. I told you a few minutes ago about my father, Pat Johnson, Shreveport Fire Department, the fire on May 11th, 1984. I want to tell you a little more about what happened to my family after that fire, because I think it matters to this discussion of who pays their bills, and when, and why. My father was in the burn unit at Louisiana State University Medical Center for 116 days. During those 116 days, my mother, Jean Johnson, could not work. She had to care for him at the hospital, and she had to care for 4 children at home. The 4 children were me, my brother, Chris, my sister Linda, and my sister Laura. The youngest of us, Laura, was 3 years old at the time. We had no income except the disability payments from the fire department, which arrived slowly, because disability payments always arrive slowly, especially when a family needs them quickly. During those 4 months, Congresswoman, my parents fell behind on bills. They fell behind on the mortgage, on the small ranch house on Uri Drive in Shreveport that they had bought in 1978. They fell behind on the electric bill. They fell behind on the water bill. They fell behind on the bill from the funeral home that had handled the arrangements for the funeral flowers they had sent to Dan Shelton's family. They could not afford to send those flowers, but my mother insisted on sending them. She said it was the only thing left for our family to do for Dan. My mother made a list of every person and every business that we owed money to. She wrote the list on a yellow legal pad that she kept on the kitchen counter next to the phone. I still have that yellow legal pad. Congresswoman, it is in a cardboard box in the closet of my office in the United States Capitol. There are 37 entries on the list. Over the next 3 years and 10 months, over 3 years of slowly arriving disability payments, and then part-time nursing shifts that my mother took on once my father was stable enough to be left alone for short periods. She paid every single entry on that list. Everyone, including the funeral flowers for Dan Shelton's family. The very last payment was made in January of 1987. It was sent to a man named Robert Pettigrew, who was an electrician in Shreveport, Louisiana. He had rewired a wall socket in our kitchen on April 28th, 1984, 11 days before the fire, and he had waited almost 3 years to be paid. My mother sent Robert Pettigrew a check for $71 and a handwritten note that thanked him for his patience. I know about the check and the note because I addressed the envelope for her. My handwriting was better than hers by then because the years of nursing my father had begun to make her hands shake. I was 15 years old when I addressed that envelope, Congresswoman, and I want to tell you something I have never told anyone in public before. As I was addressing the envelope for Mr. Pettigrew, my mother said to me, and I have never forgotten the exact words, because I have replayed them in my head approximately 1,000 times over the last 41 years. She said, "Mikey, write the address neatly." Mr. Pettigrew waited a long time for this check. "The least we can do is make the envelope look like we cared. The least we can do is make the envelope look like we cared." That was my mother's view of how a working-class family treats the people it owes money to. Even when the payment is 40 months late, even when the payment is $71, even when the person being paid is an electrician, you will probably never see again. He placed his hand back on the Bible. My mother was not a wealthy woman, Congresswoman. She was the wife of a permanently disabled firefighter in Shreveport, Louisiana, raising 4 children on a partial disability pension and the part-time nursing wages of a woman whose hands were shaking. She had no Boston University economics degree. She had no Harvard Law School friends. She had no political career. She had no congressional salary. She had no staff. But she paid every bill, every single one, because that is what a working-class family does. Congresswoman, when you owe people money, you pay them. Even if it takes 3 years and 10 months, even if the payment is $71, even if the person you owe is a local electrician you will never see again. Because, and I am quoting my mother now, the exact words she used at our kitchen table in 1985 when she was first putting the list together. A Johnson pays what he owes, even if it takes 3 years, even if nobody is watching, because the Lord is watching. You wore a $19,000 dress to a $35,000 party in New York City in September of 2021. The dress said, "Tax the Rich," on the back of it, in red letters 6 inches tall, and for almost 4 years, you did not pay the working-class women who made that dress possible. You did not pay the seamstresses at Brother Velli's. You did not pay the hairstylist who threatened to file the Department of Labor complaint. You did not pay the makeup artist. You did not pay the floral designer who made the custom hairpiece. Not until the House Ethics Committee, bipartisan, unanimous, Democrats and Republicans together ordered you to pay them in July of 2025. 4 years, Congresswoman. My mother paid Robert Pettigrew $71 in 3 years and 10 months. You took 4 years to pay a $2,733 Met Gala bill, and you only paid it after you had been ordered to by a bipartisan ethics committee. And the difference between those two women is not education. It is not intelligence. It is not political sophistication. It is not even wealth. By the time you wore the dress in 2021, my mother and your campaign committee had approximately the same amount of available money. The difference is character. My mother had it. And whatever you have, Congresswoman, it is not what my mother had. You wore a message to the billionaires on the back of your dress. But the real message, the message you sent to the working class, was in the unpaid invoices. And the working class heard it. Congresswoman, the working class always hears it. The final verdict, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood up. She did not stand up because she had been recognized to speak. She stood up because she had reached the point that every politician reaches in moments like the one she was in, where the only thing left to do is to fight back as hard as possible, and to fight back standing up. Her hands came up. The defensive choreography returned in full. How dare you invoke your mother to attack me? How dare you use a story about your father's burns and a dead firefighter named Dan Shelton as props in a political theater designed to humiliate me on live C-SPAN? This is emotional manipulation dressed up as Christian humility, Mr. Speaker, and the American people watching at home see it for exactly what it is. She pointed at him. And let me tell you something about your record, Mr. Speaker. Since you want to talk about character, let me tell the American people watching at home what they should actually know about Mike Johnson of Louisiana. You spent 20 years of your legal career trying to deny LGBTQ Americans the right to marry the people they love. You defended Louisiana's same-sex marriage ban in 2004 on the record in a Shreveport Times opinion column with your byline on it. And you called same-sex relationships, and I am quoting your exact words from that column, inherently unnatural and ultimately harmful for everyone. Inherently unnatural. Those were your words. You wrote them. You published them under your own name. You celebrated the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. You have defended laws that force young abuse survivors to carry pregnancies to term. You have said publicly on the record that the separation of church and state is, quote, a lie. You have praised David Barton, an evangelical pseudo-historian who has been formally discredited by actual academic historians at Baylor University, the largest Baptist university in America, for distorting the founding history of this country. You did not just cite Barton in a footnote, you promoted him as a valid historical authority in your published constitutional law materials. You taught online courses at Liberty University for $30,000 in 2022 while serving as a sitting member of Congress. Your wife earned income from Onward Christian Education Services Incorporated and from Louisiana Right to Life Educational Committee Incorporated, both of them religious advocacy organizations that you, as a sitting member of Congress, have legislative jurisdiction over. These are conflicts of interest you have never disclosed properly, you have never accounted for, and you have never been held responsible for. And now you stand in a House committee room with a 2-year-old Bible in your hand and a story about a dead firefighter named Dan Shelton, and you lecture me about moral standing. Mr. Speaker, the only thing more offensive than your policy record is your willingness to use your father S. Burns and a dead man S. name to avoid answering for that record. Dan Shelton's family deserves better than to be used as a prop in your political theater, and so does mine. She sat down. The progressive section of the gallery erupted in applause. Jasmine Crockett stood up and clapped. 2 of the AOC supporters in the second row chanted AOC, AOC, before the Capitol Police silenced them. Jamie Raskin nodded slowly, the careful, professorial nod of a man who had just heard his call. For a full 20 seconds, the energy of the hearing room belonged to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as Cell. She had landed real punches. She had made the strongest substantive case against Mike Johnson's record that anyone in her caucus had made all year, and in her own face, watching herself receive the applause, there was the particular relief of a politician who has been taking a beating and has finally gotten one strong swing of her own to land. Mike Johnson waited for the applause to die down. He did not interrupt. He did not look angry. He did not look hurt. He looked, if anything, slightly relieved. The way a witness looks in a courtroom when opposing counsel has finally finished an attack, and the witness's turn to respond has arrived. When the noise finally settled, his voice was quieter than it had been before. Congresswoman, I am going to address every one of those points because I do not run from my own record. I stand by it, and I want the audience watching at home to hear my answers in my own voice, in my own words, so that they can judge for themselves what kind of man I am and what kind of constitutional positions I hold. 5 points. I will take them in the order you offered them. 1. Same-sex marriage, the 2004 Shreveport Times column. You quoted me accurately. Those were my words. I wrote them at the age of 32 as a Southern Baptist constitutional attorney in Shreveport, Louisiana, reflecting the views I held at that time in my life. I want to be honest with you, Congresswoman, because I think honesty matters more than political comfort. I do not take back what I wrote. I believed it then. In my private life as a Christian, I still hold many of the underlying theological convictions that I expressed in that column. But I want to add something the column did not say, and that I want everyone watching this hearing on C-SPAN to hear in my own voice. In 2015, the United States Supreme Court decided Obergefell versus Hodges. Same-sex marriage became the law of the land of the United States of America. I am a constitutional attorney. I respect the rule of law. I have never tried to reverse Obergefell. I have never voted for legislation to overturn it. I have never, in my capacity as Speaker of the House or as a member of Congress, used government power to obstruct a single LGBTQ American from exercising the rights that the Supreme Court recognized in 2015. You can disagree with my private religious convictions, Congresswoman, that is your right, under the First Amendment, which I will defend until my last breath. But you cannot accuse me of using government to impose my religious convictions on Americans who do not share them, because I have not done it, and the public record bears that out. 2 Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, 2022. I did celebrate the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I will not apologize for celebrating it. I believe, as a matter of constitutional law and of personal conscience, that Roe was wrongly decided in 1973, and that the question of abortion properly belongs to the democratic process in the individual states. You disagree. Millions of Americans disagree with me. That is what democracy looks like. We are allowed to disagree about hard moral questions in this country, Congresswoman. That is the entire point of the First Amendment. On the specific accusation about abuse survivors, Congresswoman, I want to be very precise here because the accusation is serious, and I am not going to let it go unanswered. I have never, in any piece of legislation, in any public statement, in any legal brief, in any column or op-ed or interview, argued that an underage assault survivor should be forced to carry a pregnancy to term. The Ohio case from 2022 that you are referring to was governed by Ohio state law, which I did not write, which I did not vote on, and over which I have no congressional jurisdiction. Ohio law in 20. I have never opposed medical exceptions for assault cases or for the life of the mother. Those are distortions of my position, Congresswoman, and I am not going to let them stand on the record of this hearing. 3. The separation of church and state is a lie. Quote. The full quote, which you can find on my campaign website, on my official Congressional website, and in the C-SPAN archive, is that the phrase separation of church and state does not appear in the United States Constitution. That is factually accurate. The phrase appears in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802, 16 years after the Constitution was ratified. The phrase is not in the First Amendment, which says, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. End quote. Those are two different concepts. The First Amendment prohibits the establishment of a state church. It does not prohibit religious expression in public life. This is a well-established distinction in American constitutional law that you can find in any first-year law school casebook on the religion clauses. I will not apologize for pointing it out, because pointing it out is what 20 years of constitutional law practice taught me to do. 4. David Barton. I have cited David Barton in some of my published work. I have also cited dozens of other historians, theologians, and legal scholars whose work I have found valuable over the years. I do not endorse every position that David Barton has ever taken. I do not endorse every position that any historian I have ever cited has ever taken. The accusation that citing a historian constitutes endorsement of every claim that historian has ever made would not survive the first day of any decent law school evidence class, Congresswoman, and I think you know that. 5. Liberty University and Onward Christian Education Services. Both of those income sources are disclosed in full on my financial disclosure forms. You can find them on the House Clerk's public website. They are not hidden. They are not concealed. They have been on file with the appropriate authorities since the day the income was earned, and they have been audited by the House Ethics Committee, which has found no violation of any disclosure rule. The accusation that they are undisclosed conflicts of interest, Congresswoman, is factually false. They are disclosed. That is the opposite of undisclosed. And if you would like, I can have my Chief of Staff send you the URL to the House Clerk's website so that you can verify the disclosure for yourself before you make the accusation again in another hearing. Now, I have addressed all 5 of your attacks on my record. I have stood by my answers. I have not run from any of them. And I would like to return to the original purpose of this hearing, which is the question of where the $885,000 of Brand New Congress LLC donor funds went. Congresswoman, between 2017 and 2018, your campaign organization moved approximately $885,000 of small-dollar donor funds through a private limited liability company called Brand New Congress LLC. This is not in dispute. The transfers are recorded in the Public Federal Election Commission filings of Justice Democrats, PAC, and Brand New Congress, PAC, both of which are required to file quarterly disclosures, and both of which did file the disclosures. The structure was set up by your former Chief of Staff, Saikat Chakrabarty. He has acknowledged this in 2 separate published interviews, one with Vox in 2019 and one with The Intercept in 2020. Both of those publications are left-leaning, for the record, so I am not citing Fox News or Breitbart on this point. He has stated in his own words that the LLC structure was chosen specifically because LLCs do not have to publicly disclose their expenditures the way that PACs do. Those are his words, not mine. A formal complaint was filed with the Federal Election Commission by the National Legal and Policy Center, which is a nonpartisan ethics watchdog organization. The complaint is now 7 years old. It remains pending. The FEC has not issued a final ruling. I want to be fair to you on the legal standing. You have not been found guilty of any campaign finance violation in any formal legal proceeding, but the facts of the financial structure are not in dispute. The transfers happened. The dollar amounts are public. The LLC structure is public. Your Chief of Staff's admissions are public. And the question that the original FEC complaint asks, and that journalists at Vox, The Intercept, Politico, and several local New York newspapers have asked you over the last 7 years, has never been answered. My question is straightforward, Congresswoman. Where did the $885,000 go? Who received it? For what specific services? Not what was it categorized as. Where did it go? Jamie Raskin leaned forward to his microphone. He had been silent for the last 40 minutes, silent in the particular way that constitutional law professors are silent when they are trying to identify the precise legal moment at which to interject, and he had finally identified it. Mr. Chairman, I have to object. Speaker Johnson is discussing the substance of a pending Federal Election Commission complaint that has not been adjudicated. As I taught my students at the American University Washington College of Law for 25 years, the Supreme Court in Watkins v. United States in 1957 specifically held that congressional investigations must serve a legitimate legislative purpose and cannot be used to expose private affairs purely for the sake of exposure. Speaker Johnson's line of questioning Mr. Raskin, with respect, and I mean that with the full force of the phrase, I am familiar with Watkins versus United States. I cited it in my own constitutional law casebook at the Louisiana State University, Hall M. Hebert Law Center for 6 semesters between 2004 and 2007. I would like to point out, because precision in case law matters more than reputation in case law, that Watkins was a 1,957 decision about the House Un-American Activities Committee, as questioning of a labor organizer named John Watkins about his associations with other private individuals. It was not a decision about a sitting member of Congress being asked about her own publicly filed Federal Election Commission disclosures. Mr. Raskin, the Supreme Court's holding in Watkins specifically distinguished between the privacy rights of private citizens and the public conduct of public officials. As a sitting member of the United States Congress, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has dramatically reduced expectations of privacy in matters of campaign finance, a principle that the court reaffirmed in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission in 2010, and again in Federal Election Commission versus Wisconsin Right to Life in 2007. Mr. Raskin, you taught at American University for 25 years before you came to Congress. I have read 3 of your published academic articles on legislative oversight and the limits of congressional inquiry. You know the distinction I am making better than I do. I would respectfully suggest that you are using a case you know does not actually apply because you have run out of substantive defenses for your colleague. Raskin opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at the notes in front of him, looked at AOC, did not respond. The constitutional law professor, who had once been considered the smartest Democrat in the House Judiciary Committee, had been outmatched on his own case law on live C-SPAN by the Speaker of the House for the second time in 4 months. The first time had been in a different committee room, in a different hearing, against a different Republican from Louisiana. Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone. Her voice had the particular sharpness of a politician who knew that the moment was getting away from her and that someone needed to do something to slow it down. Mr. Speaker, you are a white Christian nationalist man from Louisiana lecturing a woman of color about where her money goes. This is the same pattern that white men with Bibles have used against black and brown women for generations. The same pattern of paternalistic. Byron Donalds cut in before Mike Johnson could. Mr. Chairman, I am going to respond to that because Speaker Johnson should not have to respond to it himself. He turned in his chair to face Crockett directly. Congresswoman Crockett, I am Byron Donalds. I have been sitting in this hearing room for the entire morning. I am a black man from Brooklyn. I am a Republican. I have just listened to Speaker Johnson ask a direct, factual question about a publicly filed campaign finance document. If asking where the money went is white supremacy, Congresswoman, then we have officially redefined white supremacy to mean any accountability question that gets directed at a progressive member of Congress. And that definition will not hold. Not with me. Not with the millions of black and brown Americans who are voting Republican in larger numbers in every election cycle. Not with the black voters in my district in Southwest Florida who elected me to this seat in 2020 by larger margins than any Republican in the history of my district. And not with history. The question stands, Congresswoman Crockett, where did the money go? It is not a racist question. It is an accounting question. And accounting does not have a race. The hearing room went silent. Crockett opened her mouth, closed it, looked at AOC. AOC did not look back. Crockett had nothing. Mike Johnson turned back to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Congresswoman, I am going to ask the question one more time, and I am going to give you as much time as you need to answer it. Where did the $885,000 go? The silence began. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reached for the water glass on the witness table. It was the same movement that she had made during every difficult committee hearing of her political career. The practiced reach, the graceful lift of the glass to her lips, the small sip of water that gave her 3 seconds to think and to compose her answer. 3 seconds was usually enough. 3 seconds was not enough. Her hand touched the glass. Her fingers closed around it, but she did not lift it. She looked at the glass. She looked at Mike Johnson. She looked at the small leather-bound Bible on the table across from her, the Bible whose burn mark she had asked about, whose story she was now wishing she had never asked for, and her hand released the glass and rested on the table beside it. The water stayed in the glass. The 3 seconds became 10 seconds. The 10 seconds became 20 seconds. And the water glass, full, untouched, ordinary, became a witness to something that had never happened to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in any committee hearing she had ever attended in her 7 years in the United States Congress. She had nowhere to hide. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than it had been all morning. "Mr. Speaker, I am legally advised not to discuss Congresswoman. I want to tell you what I tell my 4 daughters when they come home from school, upset about something that was said to them. I tell them words reveal character faster than actions do, because actions can be planned and rehearsed. But words are almost always reflexive. What comes out of your mouth when you are under pressure is the truest thing about you. It is the part of you that has not had time to rehearse. You have been under pressure for the last 43 minutes, Congresswoman, under direct questions about your own conduct, your own finances, your own donor money. And what has come out of your mouth during those 43 minutes has been, the Republican Party is the American Taliban. Mike Johnson is a religious extremist. Mike Johnson is a Christian nationalist. Mike Johnson is a threat to women. Asking where the money went is sexist. Asking again is paternalistic. Asking a third time is white nationalism. That is what came out, Congresswoman. That is the unrehearsed you. And I think the American people watching this hearing on C-SPAN, including my 4 daughters who are watching this hearing right now in our home in Shreveport, Louisiana, have seen enough of the unrehearsed you to make their own judgment about the character that you are choosing to show them today. I do not need to humiliate you. I do not need to answer your attacks any further. The American people have been watching you for 43 minutes. They have reached their own conclusions. And the conclusions are about you. Not about me, not about my party, not about my Bible, not about my father's burns, and not about a dead firefighter named Dan Shelton, who deserved better than to be used as a punchline in your last opening statement. The Lord keeps better books than the Federal Election Commission, Congresswoman, and I think tonight, when you go home to your apartment in Washington, and you sit at your kitchen table, and you pour yourself a glass of wine, and you think about what happened in this hearing room today, you might want to open your own books and see what he has written in them. I yield, Mr. Chairman. Speaker Johnson, Comer said, "The committee will recess for 10 minutes before adjourning. Do you wish to add anything to the record before we close the hearing?" "Yes, Mr. Chairman. One brief statement, if I may. Because I do not want to leave this hearing on a personal note when the actual issue is much broader than one person. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, I want to zoom out for a moment, because what we have been discussing in this hearing today is not just you as an individual. It is a pattern across the entire Democratic Party, a pattern that the American people have been watching for the last decade, and that the American people have earned the right to ask hard questions about. Your party has become the party of celebrity politics, Congresswoman. Your party raises more money than the Republican Party does, dramatically more, according to the most recent Federal Election Commission filings. But your candidates keep losing in working-class districts that voted Democratic for 50 consecutive years. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Indiana. Every one of those states was a Democratic stronghold in my parents' generation. Every one of them now votes Republican by increasing margins, year after year, election cycle after election cycle. Why, Congresswoman? It is not because working-class Americans suddenly became evangelical Christians. It is not because working-class Americans suddenly started hating immigrants or gay people or anyone else. It is because your party has stopped speaking the language of working-class Americans. Your party speaks the language of Ivy League seminar rooms, Congresswoman intersectionality, Latinx, birthing persons, cis-heteropatriarchy, carcerality, settler colonialism, cultural appropriation, lived experience, centering marginalized voices. These are not the words my mother used when she was paying 37 bills on a yellow legal pad in Shreveport, Louisiana, in the winter of 1985. These are not the words my father used in the burn unit at LSU Medical Center when he was learning how to feed himself again with a metal spoon held in his only working hand. These are not the words that Robert Pettigrew, the electrician, used when he waited 3 years and 10 months for $71. These are the words of people who have never in their entire adult lives had to add up 37 bills on a yellow legal pad. They are the words of a class, and I am using the word class in the way Karl Marx used it, Congresswoman, because I think you might appreciate the reference. They are the words of a class of Americans that has built its identity around its distance from the people it claims to represent. The Democratic Party of my parents' generation was the party of Harry Truman, a haberdasher from Independence, Missouri, who wore off-the-rack suits and said what he thought in plain English. The Democratic Party of today is the party of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Boston University economics graduate from Yorktown Heights, Westchester County, who wore a designer dress to a $35,000 gala in New York City, and told the American people that she represents the working class. Congresswoman, the working class hears you, and the working class is voting accordingly. Look at the last 3 election cycles. Look at the margins in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Iowa, in West Virginia, in Tennessee, in Louisiana. The working class is not voting against Democrats because Republicans have tricked them. The working class is voting against Democrats because the Democratic Party has become a party that looks down on them. And when you stood up at the beginning of this hearing this morning and called the Republican Party the American Taliban, what you were really doing, whether you meant to or not, was calling the millions of working-class Americans who vote for my party ignorant, uneducated, fundamentalist, brainwashed religious extremists. The Taliban? They are not the Taliban, Congresswoman. They are Americans. They get up before dawn. They pay their bills on time, even when paying the bill takes 3 years and 10 months. They raise their children to respect the law. They go to church on Sunday, and they put their spare change in the collection plate. They are the people my mother was when she paid Robert Pettigrew his $71 in January of 1987. They are the people my father was when he walked into a burning chemical facility on May 11th, 1984, and walked out a different man. They are the people Dan Shelton was when he did not walk out of that building at all. They are not the Taliban, Congresswoman. They are your countrymen, and they are listening, and they will be voting in November of 2026, and again in November of 2028, and again every 2 years after that, until either your party learns to speak their language again, or until your party is replaced by a party that will. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Comer banged the gavel. Based on the public records and testimony presented today, the committee will refer the matter of the brand-new Congress LLC structure to the Federal Election Commission for renewed review, and additional questions concerning the September 2021 Met Gala disclosure to the House Ethics Committee. This hearing of the House Oversight Committee stands adjourned. The gavel fell. The room emptied in stages, and the stages told the story. Jasmine Crockett packed up first. She did not look at AOC. She did not look at Raskin. She gathered her papers, slid them into a leather folio, and walked out of the hearing room through the main doors, already typing on her phone before she had reached the hallway. Her staff aide tried to catch her. She waved him off without looking back. Jamie Raskin followed. He gathered his notes carefully, the way Raskin always gathered his notes, the way that 25 years of constitutional law lecturing had trained him to gather his notes. And he walked out through the main doors. As he passed Mike Johnson's seat, he paused for half a second. He did not extend his hand. He did not speak loudly enough for the C-SPAN microphones to pick it up, but the lip reader hired by Politico the next morning identified the words clearly. And the words were, "Speaker," well argued. Mike Johnson nodded, said nothing back. Raskin walked out. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was the last Democrat left at the table. She sat there for 90 seconds after the gavel had fallen. She reached for the water glass again. This time she lifted it. She drank. She set it down carefully on the witness table in the same spot it had been in for the entire hearing. She gathered her papers. She stood up. She walked toward the side exit of the hearing room, not the main doors where the reporters were waiting with cameras and microphones, but the side door that led to the staff hallway, the same side door that her colleague Maxine Waters had walked through in a different hearing, in a different month, in a different year. Byron Donalds walked over to where Mike Johnson was still sitting. He extended his right hand. Johnson took it. "Mr. Speaker, Byron, thank you for the Brooklyn intervention. That mattered more than you know. It was true, sir. That's all. It was true." "It was." "Thank you." Comer nodded from the chairman's seat. James Comer was a tobacco farmer from Kentucky who had become a congressman because he had decided late in life that he was tired of watching Washington work for everyone except the people he had grown up with. He did not give compliments easily. He nodded at Mike Johnson now, and the nod said everything that Comer wanted to say. Mike Johnson stood up. He picked up the small, leather-bound Bible from the table. He held it for a moment in his right hand. Then he placed it carefully back into the inside breast pocket of his suit jacket, the same pocket that his father had carried it in on the morning of May 11th, 1984, when Pat Johnson had walked into a burning chemical facility on the south side of Shreveport, Louisiana, and had walked out a different man. The Bible was where it belonged. Mike Johnson turned and walked out of the hearing room. Speaker Mike Johnson flew commercial back to Shreveport that Friday evening, consciously declining the government executive aircraft maintained by the Air Force for his position. Several of his predecessors had utilized them routinely for weekend travel, but Johnson rejected the privilege for personal trips because his father had long ago imparted a simple lesson: a public servant who spends taxpayer money to visit his own family is a man who has forgotten where the money came from. He traveled without fanfare. During the flight, a fellow passenger recognized him from the footage that was already dominating national news networks, quietly offering her condolences regarding his father's story before retreating into a respectful silence for the duration of the journey. He landed at Shreveport Regional at 8:47 inches the evening. His brother Chris picked him up in the same reliable pickup truck he had driven for years. They drove to the modest ranch house on Uri Drive that Pat and Jean Johnson had bought in 1978 and never moved out of. Pat Johnson was sitting in his wheelchair in the living room when Mike walked in. Pat was 79 years old. His face had aged well, better than the doctors had predicted in 1984, but the scars on his forearms and on the back of his neck were still visible after 42 years, and his hair on the left side of his head, where the helmet had fused to his scalp, had never grown back the way it had on the right side. Jean Johnson, 78 years old, was in the kitchen making coffee. Her hands had been shaking since 1986, but she had figured out how to compensate, and the coffee always got made. Mike sat down at the kitchen table across from his father. He placed the small, leather-bound Bible on the table between them. "Mikey, I saw the hearing on the C-SPAN. Your sister Linda called me up about it. She said they played part of it on the news. Did I do all right, Daddy?" "You did fine, son. You did fine." Long pause. "That young lady from New York? Did she ask about my Bible?" "She asked. I told her." "You told her about Dan Shelton?" "I told her about Dan Shelton." Pat Johnson reached out across the table with a scarred right hand. The hand that had pulled him out of a burning building in 1984. The hand that had held the young Mike Johnson up to look at his first fishing rod. The hand that had taught him how to write his first letter to his grandmother. How to tie a Windsor knot. How to fold an American flag the right way. The hand touched the burn mark on the lower right corner of the Bible's front cover. "You know, Mikey, when I gave you this Bible in the hospital that morning, May 15th, 1984, I didn't think I was going to live another week. I thought I was giving you something after I was gone. I thought it was a goodbye present." "I know, Daddy. It turned out to be a hello present. Turned out I had another 42 years to see what you were going to do with it." Long pause. Mike Johnson did not say anything. He could not. "Mikey, I want you to remember something your mother used to say back when we were trying to pay off Robert Pettigrew. You remember?" "I remember." "What did she say?" Mike Johnson, 56th Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, looked at his father across the kitchen table, where he had eaten breakfast every morning of his childhood from 1978 until he had left for LSU in 1991. He looked at the scars on his father's hand. He looked at the burn mark on the Bible. She said, "A Johnson pays what he owes, even if it takes 3 years, even if nobody is watching, because the Lord is watching." Pat Johnson nodded. He looked at the Bible. He looked up at his son. "That young lady from New York? She didn't learn that one? Somebody forgot to teach her that one." "Yes, sir." "You keep that Bible in your pocket, Mikey. You keep it until the Lord calls you home, and then you give it to one of your boys, if you have any to give it to, or one of your girls. A girl can hold on to a Bible same as a boy can. The important thing is that you give it to somebody who will know what the burn mark is." "Yes, Daddy, I will." Jean Johnson set 3 cups of coffee on the table. The slow, careful movement of a woman whose hands have been shaking for 40 years. She sat down across from her son and her husband. In the quiet of that humble home, far removed from the glaring lights of the Capitol and the endless spin of the media cycle, the core truth of the day settled. Speaker Michael James Johnson, the 56th Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, constitutional lawyer for 20 years, and the devoted son of a Shreveport firefighter named Pat Johnson, who had survived the unthinkable on May 11th, 1984, sat peacefully at the very same kitchen table where he had first learned as a young boy of 15 that character is defined by honoring your debts. Somewhere in Queens, New York, in a different kitchen, in a different house, in a different family, a different congresswoman was sitting at her own table, trying to figure out what had happened on live C-SPAN that morning. She would have a long night ahead of her. The clip of the hearing was already at 12 million views and climbing. The clip of Byron Donalds neutralizing the race card was at 8 million. The clip of Jamie Raskin saying, "Speaker, well argued," had been picked up by every major news network in the country. The Lord has always kept better books than the Federal Election Commission, and the Lord, as Jean Johnson had taught her son in the winter of 1985 at this same kitchen table, was always watching. What the nation had just witnessed on live television was a quiet, measured Speaker of the House carrying a 42-year-old burned Bible in his pocket and drawing upon 2 decades of rigorous constitutional law experience, thoroughly dismantling an opponent's deeply flawed narrative. He achieved this using nothing but undeniable public records, profound personal testimony, the unwavering truth of his colleagues, and the quiet dignity of a mother who paid an electrician exactly what she owed. It was a stark, undeniable reminder of the enduring power of substance over political spectacle. The ultimate legacy of the Shreveport Fire Department, which lost a brave man named Dan Shelton on May 11, 1984, stood as a monumental testament to true sacrifice. The memory of Pat and Jean Johnson and the yellow legal pad with 37 handwritten entries that sat on a modest kitchen counter from 1984 until 1987 proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that real American dignity resides in the quiet, unyielding integrity of the working class. It lives in the hearts of mothers who pay their bills, however late, but always in full. No performative designer dress with red letters could ever compete with the unshakable foundation of genuine character. History keeps a far more accurate and unforgiving ledger than the Federal Election Commission, and the truth, inevitably, always comes to light. In a political landscape dominated by carefully rehearsed talking points and viral sound bites, when the cameras are turned off and the crowd finally goes quiet, what does your character truly say about the debts you owe to those who came before you?